He's too weak to fight back. That was the last mistake they ever made. I stood in the shadows, listening to my wife plan my destruction with her lover, thinking I was just a senile old fool. They wanted my money, my dignity, and my life. But they forgot one thing. The most dangerous man is the one with nothing left to lose. I didn't get mad. I got even. Watch the ultimate revenge unfold. Subscribe now and let the games begin. My name is Daniel. I am 56 years old, and until that Thursday afternoon in October, I believed I knew my wife, Evelyn, better than anyone in the world. It started as such an innocent idea, born from a desire to bring a little brightness to her stressful week. Evelyn had been working late again, pulling those 12 and 14-hour days that came with being the CEO of Meridian Technologies. I had been making dinner for one too many nights, eating alone while she texted me brief updates about board meetings and client emergencies. That morning, she had rushed out without her usual coffee, and I thought bringing her favorite latte and a homemade sandwich might be a welcome surprise. The downtown office building gleamed in the autumn sunlight as I pulled into the visitor parking space. I walked through the glass doors carrying the coffee and brown bag, feeling oddly nervous in the intimidating corporate space of marble and chrome. A security guard sat behind an imposing desk, his nameplate reading Henry. "Good afternoon," I said, approaching with a confident smile. "I'm here to see Evelyn. I'm her husband, Daniel." Henry looked up from his computer screen, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something I couldn't quite read. He studied my face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You said you're Mrs. Hutchkins' husband." His voice carried a note of confusion that made my stomach tighten. "Yes, that's right, Daniel. I brought her lunch." Henry's eyebrows shot up, and then he did something that froze my blood. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a genuine, bewildered laugh. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I see Mrs. Hutchkins' husband every day. He just left about 10 minutes ago. There he is now, coming back." I turned, following Henry's gaze, and watched a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stride through the lobby. He was younger than me, mid-40s, with a confident bearing that seemed to own every room he entered. "Afternoon, Henry. Evelyn asked me to grab those files from the car," the man said. "No problem, Mr. Sterling. She's in her office," Henry replied. Marcus. I knew that name from Evelyn's work stories. Her vice president, who joined the company 3 years ago, the man she always mentioned in a strictly professional context. My hands felt numb around the coffee cup as Henry looked between Marcus and me, genuine confusion creasing his features. "I'm sorry, sir, but are you sure you're her husband? Because Mr. Sterling here is married to her." The words hit me like physical blows. Marcus paused mid-stride, his attention drawn to our conversation. When his eyes met mine, I saw recognition flicker across his face. He knew exactly who I was. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice smooth and controlled. Every instinct screamed at me to explode, to demand answers. But a deeper wisdom born from years of accounting practice told me to play along. "Oh, you must be Marcus," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Evelyn mentioned you. I'm Daniel, a friend of the family." The lie tasted bitter, but it bought me time. Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained watchful. "Ah, yes. Evelyn mentioned you too. She's in meetings, but I can make sure she gets whatever you brought." I handed over the coffee and sandwich, my movements mechanical. "Just tell her Daniel stopped by." I walked back to my car in a daze. My world fundamentally shifted. 28 years of marriage, and I had just discovered that in the eyes of the world she inhabited, I didn't even exist. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Williste Skepton. Sitting in the driver's seat, I stared at the office building through my windshield before finally starting the car and driving home through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Our house looked the same. The red brick colonial we had bought when Evelyn first made partner at her previous firm. The garden she had insisted on planting our second year there. The mailbox with both our names printed in careful script. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except now I knew it was all built on lies. Inside, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a home waiting for its occupants to return, but the hollow emptiness of a stage set, a carefully constructed facade. I walked through rooms filled with our shared memories, vacation photos, wedding pictures, the ceramic bowl Evelyn had made in that pottery class she had taken 5 years ago. Had any of it been real? I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. My mind kept replaying the scene at the office, searching for clues I had missed. explanations that might make sense of what I had witnessed. But there was only one explanation that fit, and it was one I wasn't ready to accept. The front door opened at 9:30, just as it had countless times before. Evelyn's heels clicked against the hardwood floor, and her keys jangled as she set them on the hall table. Normal sounds of a normal evening. Except nothing was normal anymore. "Daniel, I'm home." Her voice carried the tired warmth I had grown accustomed to over the years. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking every inch the successful CEO in her tailored navy suit, her blonde hair still perfectly arranged despite her long day. "How was your day?" I asked, the question automatic. She sighed, loosening her jacket. "Exhausting. Back-to-back meetings all afternoon." I nodded, studying her face for any sign of deception, any hint that she knew about my visit to her office. There was nothing. Her expression was exactly what it had always been. Tired, distracted, but genuinely glad to see me. "Did you eat already?" she asked. "I brought you coffee today," I said carefully, watching her reaction closely. "To your office." Evelyn paused in the middle of reaching for a glass. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression, a micro-adjustment of her mask. Then she smiled. "You did." "I didn't get any coffee. I gave it to Marcus to pass along," I replied, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Another pause, so brief I might have imagined it. "Oh, Marcus mentioned someone stopped by. I had back-to-back meetings all afternoon, so I probably missed it." She moved to the refrigerator, her back to me. "That was sweet of you to think of me." I watched her pour herself a glass of wine, noting how her hands remained perfectly steady. Either she was telling the truth, or she was the most accomplished liar I had ever met. After 28 years of marriage, I was terrified to discover which one it was. The next morning arrived with cruel normalcy. Evelyn kissed my cheek before leaving for work, the same quick peck she had given me for years. She wore her favorite perfume, the one I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. Everything about her was familiar, comforting, exactly as it had always been. Except now, I knew I was kissing a stranger. I called my office and told my assistant I would be working from home. For the first time in my 15-year practice, I couldn't bear the thought of discussing tax returns and quarterly reports. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grew cold while I stared at Evelyn's coffee mug in the sink. By noon, I found myself doing something I had never done before. Going through Evelyn's things, not frantically, not desperately, but with the methodical precision that had made me successful in accounting. I started with the obvious places. Her home office, the desk where she sometimes worked in the evenings. The drawers revealed nothing suspicious. Work papers, company letterhead, business cards from clients I recognized. But then I found something that made my stomach clench. A restaurant receipt from Chez Laurent, the French place downtown where we had celebrated our anniversary 3 years running. It was dated 6 weeks ago for 2 people. $68.50. I remembered that night clearly because Evelyn had told me she was having dinner with a potential client, a female client from Portland who was in town for just one evening. I stared at the receipt, my hands trembling slightly. No alcohol charges that would accompany client entertainment. No appetizers or desserts that Evelyn would order to impress a potential client. Just 2 entrees and a bottle of wine. The kind of intimate dinner I thought was reserved for us. I spent the rest of the afternoon like a detective in my own life, examining familiar things with new eyes. The credit card statements I had always glanced at casually, trusting Evelyn to handle our finances since she made 3 times what I did, now told a different story. I studied them line by line. Lunch charges on days when she told me she was brown bagging it to save money. Gas station purchases in neighborhoods across town far from her usual routes. A charge at a bookstore for $37 on a Tuesday afternoon when she had supposedly been in back-to-back meetings. Evelyn hadn't bought a book for pleasure reading in years, but the most damning discovery came from her laptop. She had left it open on the kitchen counter, something she had been doing more frequently over the past year. I told myself I was just closing it to save battery, but my eyes caught a notification bubble in the corner of the screen. Marcus had sent her a calendar invitation. I shouldn't have clicked on it. I knew I was crossing a line, violating her privacy in a way that would have horrified me just 24 hours earlier. But 24 hours earlier, I had believed my wife was faithful. The calendar invitation was for dinner, tonight, 7 p.m., at Bellacourt, the Italian place that had become our special occasion restaurant. The reservation was under Marcus's name. My chest felt tight, as I scrolled through more calendar entries. Lunch meetings with Marcus that weren't labeled as business. Doctor's appointments that Evelyn had never mentioned to me. But the entries that made me physically nauseous were the recurring ones. Coffee with M every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Dinner plans every other Thursday. I was looking at a parallel life, meticulously scheduled and carefully hidden. Marcus wasn't just her work colleague, or even just her affair partner. Based on these calendar entries, he was her primary relationship. I was the side note, the obligation, the inconvenience worked around. 2/6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Williste Skepton. The garage door rumbled open at 6:15, signaling Evelyn's return far earlier than usual for a Thursday. I closed the laptop quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs as I heard her heels clicking on the kitchen tile. "You're home early," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal despite the chaos in my mind. She looked beautiful, a realization that struck me with a sharp pang. She had refreshed her makeup, her hair was perfectly styled, and she was wearing the black dress I had bought her for her birthday last year. A dress she had claimed was too fancy for everyday wear. "I managed to wrap up early for once," she said, moving past me to the refrigerator, her perfume trailing behind her like a ghost. "I thought maybe we could grab dinner out tonight. It's been forever since we did anything spontaneous." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that if I hadn't seen the calendar invitation on her laptop, I would have been thrilled. "Where did you have in mind?" I asked, playing along. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe that new sushi place on 5th Street, she replied, checking her phone as she spoke. I watched her fingers fly across the screen, likely texting Marcus. Suddenly, she stopped, looking up with feigned disappointment. "Actually, I just remembered I have that conference call with the Tokyo office." It totally slipped my mind. She shook her head ruefully. "Rain check." "Of course," I said, the words tasting like bile. "What time is your call?" 7:30. It could run until 9 or 10. You know how these international things go. She was already moving toward the stairs. "I'll probably just grab something quick on my way back to the office." I nodded, playing my part in this elaborate deception. "I'll make myself something here." 20 minutes later, she came back down wearing a navy blouse and dark slack. Professional enough for an office, but attractive enough for a date. "I'll try not to be too late," she said, kissing my cheek. The same spot she had kissed that morning. But now, it felt like a brand of betrayal. I waited until she drove away, then got into my own car. At 8:30, I found myself driving past Bellecourt. I told myself I was just checking, that maybe I was wrong. But when I saw Evelyn's silver BMW parked next to a dark Mercedes I knew belonged to Marcus, the last thread of hope snapped. They were inside, sharing the kind of intimate dinner I thought was exclusive to our marriage. I drove home in a daze, the weight of my new reality settling around me like a heavy coat. The revelation that would shatter the rest of my denial came 3 days later in the most mundane way possible. I was cleaning out the junk drawer in the kitchen, a quarterly ritual I performed to keep our household organized, when my fingers closed around a key I didn't recognize. It was brass, worn smooth at the edges, attached to a keychain from Harborview Apartments across town. We owned our house outright. Neither of us had any reason to have an apartment key, let alone one from a complex 30 minutes away. That afternoon, while Evelyn was at what she had called a client presentation, I drove to Harborview. It was an upscale complex, the kind of place where successful professionals might keep a discreet second residence. I sat in my car in the visitor parking area, staring at the key in my palm, wondering if I really wanted to know what door it opened. The answer arrived in the form of Marcus's Mercedes pulling into a numbered space. I watched him get out carrying a grocery bag and dry cleaning, moving with the easy familiarity of someone coming home, not someone visiting. When he disappeared into Building C, I waited 10 minutes before following. The key fit perfectly into the lock of apartment 214. The door opened onto a life I never knew existed. It wasn't a temporary hiding place or a sordid secret meeting spot. It was a home. It was fully furnished and lived in, with photos on the mantle, books on the shelves, and Evelyn's favorite throw pillows arranged on a couch I had never seen before. But it was the photos that destroyed me completely. There were pictures of Evelyn and Marcus at a company Christmas party, his arm around her waist in a possessive, intimate way. There were shots of the two of them on a beach I didn't recognize, both tanned and relaxed, Evelyn wearing a sundress I had never seen, her left hand notably bare of her wedding ring. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, cataloging evidence of a relationship that was clearly far more than an affair. In the bedroom, Evelyn's clothes hung next to Marcus's in a shared closet. Her perfume sat on the dresser next to his cologne. The bathroom held 2 toothbrushes and the expensive face cream she claimed was too costly to repurchase when she had run out 6 months ago. On the kitchen counter, however, I found the most devastating evidence of all. A folder labeled "Future Plans" in Evelyn's handwriting lay next to a stack of mail. Inside were house listings in Marcus's name, vacation brochures, and a business plan for expanding Meridian Technologies. But at the bottom of the folder was a document that made my hands shake. A consultation summary from Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled our will updates 5 years ago. According to the summary, Evelyn had met with them twice in the past 4 months to discuss optimal divorce strategies for high-asset individuals. The document outlined her approach in clinical, terrifying detail. She planned to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. The strategy involved establishing a pattern of my alleged emotional unavailability, supported by what the lawyer called lifestyle incompatibility evidence. My preference for quiet evenings at home was to be presented as social isolation. My satisfaction with my small accounting practice would be twisted into a lack of ambition. My contentment with our modest lifestyle would be reframed as an inability to support her professional growth. The most chilling part was the timeline. Evelyn had been planning this for at least 2 years, carefully documenting instances of my so-called withdrawn behavior. She had been creating a narrative of our marriage that painted me as an inadequate husband who had gradually become emotionally unavailable, while she played the role of the long-suffering wife. The woman I had been living with, loving, and trusting had been systematically building a case against me while I remained completely oblivious. I stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, and realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated replacement. Marcus hadn't just stolen my wife. He had systematically assumed my role while I was being written out of the story. With a shaking hand, I took out my phone and began to photograph everything. The photos, the closet, the future plans folder, and every page of the legal strategy that laid out my destruction. 26 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. When I returned home from the apartment complex, I found Evelyn's laptop open on the kitchen counter again. This time, I didn't hesitate. The man who respected boundaries had died the moment he unlocked apartment 214. I opened her email client and found correspondence that confirmed everything I had discovered at Harborview. And worse. There were messages between Evelyn and Marcus discussing when to make the transition, communications with her lawyer about preparing Daniel for the inevitable changes, and even emails to our mutual friends, suddenly preparing them for what she called some difficult decisions I'll need to make about my marriage. One email to her sister Jessica, dated just 2 weeks ago, was particularly devastating. It read, "Daniel has been so distant lately. I think he's going through some kind of midlife crisis, but he won't talk about it. I'm trying to be patient, but I can't sacrifice my own happiness indefinitely. Marcus thinks I should consider all my options." Reading this, I realized that Evelyn hadn't just been living a double life. She had been actively rewriting our marriage history to justify her planned exit. Every quiet evening I had spent reading while she worked, every time I had encouraged her to pursue her career ambitions, every instance of my being supportive rather than demanding had been transformed into evidence of my inadequacy. The cruelest part was recognizing how she had manipulated my own responses. When she had suggested we needed better communication last year, I had agreed to couples counseling, never realizing I was simply providing her with material to document my emotional unavailability. That night, Evelyn came home at nearly 11, apologizing for her late evening with client entertainment. She kissed my cheek and asked about my day, the same routine we had followed for years. But now I could see it for what it was, a performance designed to maintain the status quo until she was ready to execute her exit strategy. "How was the client dinner?" I asked, testing her reaction. "Productive, I think," she replied, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease to make herself tea. Marcus was there too, of course, since he'll be managing the account if we get it. Of course he was. I wondered if they had laughed about this conversation later in their shared apartment while planning their shared future. "That's good," I said. my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. You and Marcus work well together. Evelyn paused, cup halfway to her lips. We do. He really understands the business side of things. There was a warmth in her voice she used to reserve for me. I went to bed that night lying next to a woman who was planning my emotional and financial destruction, listening to her breathe and wondering if our entire marriage had been a lie, or if something had simply rotted away while I wasn't looking. I chose Saturday morning for the confrontation. Evelyn was in our kitchen, wearing the pale yellow robe I had bought her 3 Christmases ago, sipping coffee from her favorite mug while scrolling through her phone. It was the kind of peaceful domestic scene that had once filled me with contentment. Now, it felt like watching a play I could no longer pretend to believe in. We need to talk, I said, setting the folder of photos and printed emails on the kitchen table between us. Evelyn looked up, her expression shifting from casual attention to sharp awareness as she saw the documents. Her coffee mug paused, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face that might have been relief. "What's this about?" she asked, but her voice lacked the confusion it should have carried. She knew exactly what this was. "I went to your apartment yesterday. The one at Harborview." I sat down across from her, noting how her shoulders straightened, her breathing shifting to something more controlled. "I used the key from our junk drawer." Evelyn set down her mug with deliberate precision. When she looked at me again, the mask was gone. The loving wife, the concerned partner, the woman who had been apologizing for late nights had disappeared. In her place sat someone I barely recognized, someone whose eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. "I see," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "How much do you know?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Not denial, not confusion, not even anger, just a practical inquiry about the extent of the damage. "Everything," I said. "The apartment, Marcus, the divorce planning, the legal strategy, the emails to Jessica, all of it." Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm I recognized from her board meetings. She was calculating, processing, deciding how to handle this unexpected development. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Only since Thursday, when I visited your office and the security guard told me he saw your husband every day." I leaned forward, studying her face. He meant Marcus. A flicker of amusement passed across her features. Poor Henry. He's always been a bit too chatty. She reached for her coffee again, her movements unhurried. "I suppose this complicates things." I could hear my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Evelyn, we've been married for 28 years. You've been living with another man, planning to divorce me, and all you can say is that this complicates things?" She sighed, a sound of mild irritation. "Daniel, let's not be dramatic. We both know this marriage has been over for years. We both know." I stared at her. I didn't know anything. I thought we were happy. Evelyn's laugh was short and utterly without humor. "Happy? Daniel, when was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you showed any interest in my career, my goals, anything beyond your little accounting practice and your quiet evenings at home?" "I've always supported your career," I protested. "You've been passive," she corrected sharply, her voice taking on the edge she used with underperforming employees. "You've been content to let me carry the financial burden, the social obligations, the responsibility for building a life worth living. You've been perfectly happy to coast along in your comfortable little routine, while I've been growing, changing, becoming someone who needs more than you've ever been willing to offer. So you decided to replace me instead of talking to me?" I asked. Evelyn's expression softened, but not with affection. It was the patience one might show a slow child. "I didn't set out to replace you. I met Marcus 3 years ago. He was everything you're not. Ambitious, dynamic, interested in building something bigger than himself. With him, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing. With you, I felt safe, comfortable, and unchallenged. And that justified lying to me for 2 years. I wasn't lying, Daniel. I was protecting you from a reality you weren't ready to face. Our marriage was over because you stopped growing. You've been the same man at 56 that you were at 36, and I'm not the same woman." I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of her words. She was rewriting our entire history as a mutual mismatch rather than a betrayal. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we handle this like adults," she said, her posture relaxing. "I was going to file for divorce next month anyway. This just accelerates the timeline. Marcus and I want to be married by Christmas. We've been planning the small ceremony. She paused, then added, "You'll be fine, Daniel. You have your practice, your routines. You'll probably be happier without the pressure of trying to keep up with someone like me." "I trusted you," I said quietly. "I know, and I'm sorry it had to end this way. But we both deserve to be with someone who truly understands us." She stood up. "I'm not heartless, Daniel. We can work out the details through our lawyers." As she walked out of the kitchen, I heard her phone dial. Her voice became animated in a way it hadn't been with me. She was calling Marcus, telling him the secret was out, that the inconvenient husband had finally been dealt with. I sat alone in the kitchen, realizing that the woman I had married was gone, replaced by this stranger who viewed our 28 years together as nothing more than a bad investment. She was finally liquidated. 2/6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkouds the best memories on Maidlin Willistif Gepton. Monday morning found me sitting across from Jonathan, the same lawyer who had handled our wills 5 years ago. The irony was not lost on me that Evelyn had consulted with his firm about divorcing me, while I was now seeking his help to protect myself from her plans. "Daniel, I have to tell you, this is one of the most calculated divorce strategies I've seen in 30 years of practice," Jonathan said, reviewing the documents I had brought him. "Your wife has been building this case for a very long time." I nodded, watching him flip through photographs of the Harbor View apartment, copies of the legal consultation notes from her future plans folder, and printouts of Evelyn's carefully documented evidence against me. "What are my options?" I asked. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, his expression thoughtful. "Well, the good news is that her strategy depends on you being unprepared and uninformed. The fact that you discovered this before she filed changes everything. She was planning to paint you as emotionally unavailable and financially irresponsible. But we can counter that narrative with facts. You have evidence of her systematic deception and adultery, which matters even in a no-fault state when it involves the misuse of marital funds." "There's something else," I said, pulling out a folder I had prepared over the weekend. "I've been doing some financial analysis. This was where my accounting background became not just a career, but a weapon. While Evelyn had been busy documenting my alleged emotional failures, I had been quietly tracking our financial reality. Evelyn makes $200,000 a year as CEO, I explained, laying out spreadsheets and bank statements across his desk. But our joint expenses have been running about $60,000 more than her salary for the past 3 years. I've been subsidizing her lifestyle without realizing it." Jonathan studied the numbers, his expression growing increasingly interested. "My practice generates about $120,000 annually. I've been putting $80,000 into our joint account, keeping only $40,000 for my business expenses and personal needs." I pointed to a series of withdrawals from our savings account. "But she's been drawing down our joint savings to maintain the apartment with Marcus. The rent, the dinners, the gift, all of it has been paid for with money I earned." Jonathan looked up, his face grim. "This is dissipation of marital assets, Daniel. She's been using community property to fund an adulterous relationship while planning to divorce you. That's going to significantly impact how a judge views the asset division." But I wasn't done. Over the weekend, I had done something that went against my naturally trusting nature. I had investigated my own wife's business dealings. "There's more," I said, pulling out another set of documents. "Evelyn has been positioning Marcus to take over more responsibilities at Meridian Technologies. But according to the corporate filings I found, she's been doing it in ways that violate her fiduciary duty to the company's board." Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "Explain." I took a deep breath. "Marcus was hired as vice president of business development 3 years ago. But Evelyn has been systematically transferring responsibilities to him that should require board approval. She's essentially been grooming him to replace her as CEO while positioning herself as president. But she's never presented this reorganization to the board officially. She's been operating under the assumption that she can unilaterally restructure the company to benefit her relationship with Marcus." I paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. The board doesn't know about their personal relationship, and they certainly don't know about the corporate reorganization she's been implementing without their approval. Jonathan was taking notes rapidly. "Now, Daniel, this isn't just about your divorce anymore. If what you're saying is accurate, Evelyn could be facing serious professional consequences. What do you recommend?" I asked. "We file first," Jonathan said without hesitation. "We get ahead of her narrative. More importantly, We make sure the board at Meridian Technologies understands what's been happening under their nose. That afternoon, I did something that went against every instinct I had developed over our 28-year marriage. I stopped protecting Evelyn from the consequences of her actions. I called Charles, the chairman of Meridian's board of directors. Charles and I had met several times at company functions, and I had always liked his straightforward approach. "Charles, I need to bring something to your attention regarding corporate governance issues at Meridian," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's complicated, but I think the board needs to be aware of some structural changes that may not have been properly authorized." I spent the next 20 minutes carefully outlining what I had discovered, sticking strictly to facts and avoiding personal details about my marriage. "Jesus, Daniel, are you saying Evelyn has been implementing major corporate changes without board approval?" Charles asked, his voice tight. "I'm saying that based on the documents I've seen, there appears to be a significant disconnect between what's been happening operationally and what's been reported to the board." After I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. For years, I had been the supportive husband who smoothed over Evelyn's occasional ethical shortcuts and provided the stable foundation that allowed her to take professional risks. Now I was the one creating consequences she would have to face. That evening, Evelyn came home later than usual. Her face was tight with stress. Her usual composed demeanor cracked around the edges. "We need to talk," she said, setting her briefcase down with more force than necessary. "About what?" I asked calmly. "About the call Charles made to me this afternoon. About the corporate governance review the board has suddenly decided to conduct." Her eyes were hard, calculating. "About the fact that my own husband is apparently trying to destroy my career." I met her gaze steadily. "I see. Don't play innocent with me, Daniel. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Yes, I did," I replied. "The same way you knew exactly what you were doing when you spent 2 years planning my replacement." Evelyn's composure finally snapped. "Your affair with Marcus affects that too," I countered. "The board is going to find out eventually that you've been restructuring the company to benefit your personal relationship." I just gave them a head start. She stared at me, reassessing the man she thought she knew. The passive, supportive husband was gone. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to stop treating me like I'm stupid," I said. "I want you to understand that I'm not going to quietly disappear just because it would be convenient for your new life plan. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on maid lin willistif gepton." The morning I finally filed the divorce papers, the sky was a dull, oppressive gray. But inside my chest, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the explosive joy of victory, but the quiet, steady rhythm of a burden finally being set down. I didn't hesitate. With the undeniable evidence of the financial fraud and the affair that I had meticulously gathered, the legal proceedings were surprisingly swift. The forensic audit of the company accounts had been the final nail in the coffin for any defense Lauren might have tried to mount. Because of those documents, the division of assets was strictly fair. I walked away with exactly what I deserved, keeping my dignity and my financial stability intact. Now, 6 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker on as twilight deepened. This place was smaller than the house I had shared with Lauren, but it was mine. It was a sanctuary of peace, where I didn't have to walk on eggshells or wonder what lies were being whispered behind my back. The silence here wasn't lonely. It was liberating. Word travels fast in our industry, and while I had removed myself from the toxic environment, the news of the fallout reached me through mutual acquaintances who were all too eager to share the karma that had finally been served. It turned out that the consequences of their betrayal extended far beyond just our marriage. Frank, the man who had smiled in my face while stabbing me in the back, had been fired. The company didn't take kindly to the internal friction and the embarrassment caused by the exposure of his conduct. As for Lauren, her career, the thing she had prioritized over our life together, had taken a catastrophic hit. She wasn't fired, but she was stripped of her title and demoted to a position with significantly less authority, placed under strict supervision where every email and decision she made was scrutinized. The power she craved was gone, replaced by the humiliation of being watched like a delinquent child. Perhaps the most predictable part of this entire tragedy was what happened between the two of them. I learned that the great love they had destroyed our marriage for didn't even last 2 months. Once the thrill of the secrecy was gone, Once the forbidden aspect evaporated, and they were left with just the mundane reality of each other and the wreckage they had caused, the relationship imploded. It lasted exactly 6 weeks. Without the adrenaline of sneaking around and the shared game of deceiving me, they turned on each other. The stress of Frank's unemployment and Lauren's demotion soured whatever affection they thought they had. It was a hollow victory, knowing they were miserable, but it validated what I had known all along. Their affair wasn't built on love. It was built on selfishness and a cheap thrill that couldn't survive the light of day. I was pulled from my thoughts by the buzzing of my phone on the glass table. I looked down and felt a strange, dull pang when I saw the caller ID. It was Lauren. I let it ring for a moment, debating whether to answer, before finally sliding the icon across. "Hello, Lauren," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the anger that used to consume me. "Gerald." Her voice was small, trembling in a way I hadn't heard in a decade. I didn't think you'd pick up." "What do you want?" I asked, looking out at the skyline. "I wanted to apologize," she choked out, the sound of weeping audible on the other end. "I've made a terrible mistake, Gerald. Everything is falling apart. Frank is gone. I hate my job. I'm so lonely. I realize now what I had with you. I took your stability, your kindness. I took it all for granted. I listened, but I felt no urge to comfort her. You didn't just take it for granted, Lauren. You actively destroyed it." "I know," she sobbed. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Is there any chance we can talk? Maybe meet for coffee? I just want to see you. I want to try to fix this. Please, Gerald. I miss home." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. There is no home to come back to, Lauren. That house is sold, and the marriage is dead. You didn't want me when you had me. You only want me now because your fantasy world collapsed. No, that's not it. It is. I cut her off gently. I forgive you for my own peace of mind, but I will not go back. I've moved on. Please, she whispered, her voice fading. Goodbye, Lauren. I hung up the phone and placed it face down. The conversation didn't hurt. It just felt like closing the final page of a long, exhausting book. As I stood up to head back inside, the doorbell rang. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that evening. I opened the door to see Margaret standing there, holding 2 bags of groceries and wearing that warm, unpretentious smile that always put me at ease. Margaret was everything Lauren wasn't. She valued sincerity over status, and she found joy in the simple, quiet moments of life. "I brought ingredients for stew," Margaret said, stepping in and kissing my cheek. "I thought a quiet night in would be nice." "It sounds perfect," I replied, taking the bags from her. Watching her unpack the vegetables in my kitchen, humming a soft tune, I realized that I had finally found what I was looking for. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I had walked through the fire of betrayal and come out the other side, not bitter, but refined. I had my dignity. I had a fresh start. And for the first time in a long time, I knew my own value. I was free. 2-6 there it seems, and the bracement and it stuck it. Sunkoud's the best memories on Maidlin Williste Fkepton. Looking back, I realized the best revenge wasn't seeing them fall, but watching myself rise. I didn't just win a case, I reclaimed my life. To anyone listening, never sacrifice your dignity for people who only value your utility. True happiness is waiting the moment you stop settling for less. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments below, and please subscribe if you believe in justice.